Rebecca Becker Morrison was 26 years old when her neighbors decided that digging a pit in the ground to store firewood proved widowhood had destroyed her common sense. It was June 1870 in Iowa Territory near Cedar Rapids, and every homesteader understood that underground meant damp and rotting. You stored firewood above ground where air could circulate, not below ground where moisture would ruin it. Becca had lost her husband Samuel Morrison in February 1870 when pneumonia took him after 3 weeks of progressively worsening illness that started as mild winter cold and ended with him drowning in fluid his lungs couldn't expel, despite her desperate nursing and the doctor's best efforts. The illness had started February 3rd with simple cough and mild fever. Samuel continued working through it, feeding livestock, splitting firewood, maintaining winter farm routine. By February 6th, the cough was deeper, productive, bringing up phlegm that concerned Becca. By February 9th, Samuel was feverish and weak, staying in bed most of the day. Doctor arrived February 11th, examined Samuel's chest, heard the crackling in his lungs that indicated pneumonia, prescribed rest, warm compresses, steam inhalation. Said the next week would determine whether Samuel's body could fight the infection or whether it would overwhelm him. For 13 days, Becca nursed Samuel constantly, would heat water for steam inhalation, hold his head while he breathed moist air trying to loosen congestion, would apply warm compresses to his chest, would feed him broth when he could swallow, water when he couldn't, would listen to his labored breathing growing progressively worse as fluid accumulated in lungs. Samuel died February 24th at 3 a.m. The final hours were brutal, his breathing wet and rattling, each breath a struggle, consciousness fading. At the end, he simply stopped breathing, drowned in the fluid his exhausted body couldn't expel. Left Becca, 26 years old, alone on 80-acre farm facing spring planting and winter preparation without partner. She'd spent March and April in fog of grief, while mechanically managing necessary farm work. Planted 40 acres of corn, 20 acres of oats, maintained vegetable garden, fed livestock, accomplished bare minimum to keep farm functional. Through this period, she'd retreated repeatedly to the root cellar, the cool, quiet underground chamber where she'd go to cry privately where neighbors wouldn't see her grief. The root cellar was standard Iowa construction, rectangular pit 6 feet deep, 8 feet wide, 12 feet long, excavated into slight rise behind cabin. Walls lined with stone, bottom covered with gravel, timber roof creating weather protection, used for storing vegetables, preserves, anything requiring cool, stable temperature through winter. During her grief retreats to this space, Becca had noticed something that surprised her. The cellar was remarkably dry despite being underground. The gravel floor was always dry when she stepped on it. The stone walls were cool, but not damp. Stored vegetables never developed the rot or mold that dampness would cause. The underground chamber was actually drier than her cabin interior, which suffered from cooking moisture and breathing humidity. She'd analyzed this unexpected dryness and recognized the engineering. Cellar was located on rise where drainage flowed away naturally. Bottom gravel layer provided drainage pathway. Gaps around roof edges allowed ventilation, preventing humidity buildup. These same principles that kept vegetables dry could keep firewood dry if applied to dedicated storage chamber. The design crystallized through May. Excavate rectangular pit 6 feet deep, 10 feet wide, 16 feet long in well-drained location. Line bottom with 2 feet of gravel creating drainage layer. Build gravel-filled perimeter trenches, channeling any water away from chamber. Install elevated pole platform above gravel, keeping wood separated from any moisture. Cover pit with removable timber roof, creating weather protection while allowing access. The community's reaction when Becca explained the plan was immediate mockery, mixed with genuine pity for widow who'd lost her mind. She was planning to bury firewood underground where it would rot from dampness, violating fundamental storage principles that required above-ground air circulation. Harold Jennings, age 48, a successful farmer and practical voice in Cedar Rapids area, tried to explain why underground storage would destroy her winter fuel supply in early June. "Mrs. Morrison," he said kindly but firmly, "firewood must be stored above ground, where air circulates and moisture drains away. Underground storage means dampness. Water seeps into soil, moisture accumulates, wood absorbs it and rots. You'll bury 3 cords of good wood in June and dig up 3 cords of useless rotten pulp in December." "Underground will be dry if I engineer proper drainage," Becker countered. 2 feet of gravel at bottom channels water away. Perimeter drainage trenches prevent water accumulation. Elevated platform keeps wood separated from any residual moisture. The chamber stays drier than surface storage exposed to weather. "What about air circulation?" asked Francis Coleman, age 36, a cautious homesteader concerned about basic wood seasoning principles. "Firewood needs airflow to season properly and prevent mold. Underground pit traps stagnant air. Your wood will develop mold and rot even if it somehow stays physically dry." "Ventilation gaps at top allow air exchange," Becker explained. "The pit isn't sealed. It's covered with removable timber roof that allows continuous airflow. Fresh air enters, circulates through chamber, exits through gaps. Not sealed underground vault but protected chamber with engineered drainage and ventilation." She proceeded with her plan despite warnings she'd waste entire winter fuel supply on failed experiment. Hired no laborers, couldn't afford them after Samuel's death, and needed to prove design was achievable by widow working alone. Construction began in mid-June and required solving challenge of excavating large pit in Iowa clay soil while managing drainage during construction. She selected location on slight rise, highest point on her property where natural drainage flowed away in all directions. This elevation would prevent water accumulating around the pit. The excavation required removing approximately 40 cubic yards of clay soil from 10 by 16 rectangles 6 feet deep. She'd work methodically, mark grid pattern on surface, excavate one section at a time, pile soil nearby for later use as fill elsewhere on farm. Used pickaxe and shovel working in cool morning hours. The Iowa clay was hard when dry, sticky when wet, requiring careful timing. Would dig after morning dew, softened surface, but before sun made work unbearable. Each day might excavate 1 cubic yard, roughly 1 wheelbarrow load per hour sustained through 4-hour morning session. At 1 cubic yard daily, 40 cubic yards required 40 working days spread over 7 weeks, accounting for weather delays and other farm work. By late July, she'd created rectangular pit 6 feet deep with vertical walls and level bottom, like small swimming pool dug into slight rise. The drainage system was critical innovation, preventing moisture accumulation that would ruin buried firewood. Started with perimeter drainage trenches, dug narrow trenches around outside edge of pit at bottom level, angling downward away from pit at slight grade. These trenches would catch any water seeping toward pit and channel it away before entering chamber. Filled trenches with creek gravel, small stones that water could flow through easily. Extended trenches 20 feet from pit in all directions, creating drainage field. Any groundwater approaching pit would hit gravel-filled trench, flow through stones following gravity gradient, emerge 20 feet away without ever entering storage chamber. The pit bottom received 2 feet of gravel layer, creating the critical drainage foundation. Approximately 8 cubic yards of creek gravel that needed to be hauled half-mile from creek to pit, using wheelbarrow, 1 load at a time, through August Iowa heat. This was the most brutal phase of construction, testing Becker's physical endurance and determination more than any other element. The gravel needed to be small creek stones, approximately 1 to 3 inches diameter, large enough for water to flow freely between stones, small enough to create relatively stable surface. The nearest source was Timber Creek, half-mile east of her property. Would walk to creek carrying shovel and wheelbarrow, climb down bank to exposed gravel bed, dig stones loose from compacted deposit, load wheelbarrow carefully to avoid overbalancing. Each wheelbarrow load held approximately 2 cubic feet of wet gravel, weighing roughly 150 pounds when fully loaded. Too heavy, and she couldn't push it up the creek bank. Too light, and she'd need excessive trips. She learned optimal load through trial. Fill to perhaps 3/4 capacity, creating 120 pounds she could push sustainably. 8 cubic yards equals approximately 216 cubic feet. At 2 cubic feet per load, required 108 trips from creek to pit. But she couldn't work at this continuously. The physical toll was too severe. Would make perhaps 8 to 10 trips per morning session, working dawn to 10 a.m. before heat became unbearable. Each trip followed same pattern. Walk half-mile to creek, dig and load gravel, spending 15 minutes, push loaded wheelbarrow half-mile back uphill to pit, spending 30 minutes of sustained effort, dump gravel into pit, rest briefly, return empty wheelbarrow to creek, spending 15 minutes. Total cycle roughly 75 minutes per load. 8 trips per morning meant 6 hours of sustained physical labor. At 10 trips daily, including some afternoon work during cooler moments, required 11 working days to move 8 cubic yards. But she couldn't sustain 10 trips daily without rest. Her hands would blister despite calluses, shoulders would ache from pushing weight, back would complain from shoveling and dumping. Actual pace was more like 7 trips daily sustained through 2 weeks, with rest days when body demanded recovery. Total time for gravel hauling phase: 18 working days spread over 24 calendar days, accounting for weather delays, exhaustion recovery, and other necessary farm work that couldn't be ignored. By August 15th, the pit bottom was covered with 2 feet of drainage gravel. Becca had walked approximately 116 miles total distance, creek to pit and return, repeated 58 times. Had shoveled, lifted, pushed and dumped roughly 12,000 pounds of wet creek gravel. Had lost 8 pounds from already lean frame through pure caloric deficit from extraordinary work. But the gravel layer was complete, small stones creating porous layer where water could flow horizontally following slight grade toward perimeter drainage trenches. The foundation of the drainage system was in place, making underground storage feasible. The gravel served multiple purposes, provided drainage pathway for any water entering pit, created air gap beneath stored firewood, prevented moisture wicking upward from clay soil. Water hitting gravel would flow horizontally through stones toward perimeter trenches rather than pooling. The elevated platform used straight poles laid across the gravel, creating surface for firewood storage. Cut 60 poles from nearby timber, 3-inch diameter, 10 feet long. Laid them parallel with 2-inch gaps spanning the 16-foot length. The poles rested on the gravel, but were elevated by the stone layer, keeping firewood approximately 2 feet above bottom clay. The timber roof was removable cover rather than permanent structure, wanted ability to access firewood from top rather than requiring entry through side door. Built frame using heavy timbers creating 10 by 16 rectangle, covered frame with split shakes creating weather barrier. Entire roof assembly could be lifted off pit with help of lever system, allowing firewood loading and retrieval from above. Left 6-inch gap between roof edge and pit walls, creating continuous ventilation opening. Air could flow through these gaps, providing circulation while roof prevented precipitation entry. The balance between protection and ventilation was carefully engineered. By early September, the underground shed was complete, 6-foot-deep pit with gravel drainage, elevated platform, removable timber roof. From surface, looked like grass-covered mound with timber frame barely visible. Neighbors riding past would shake heads at widow's folly, burial vault for firewood that would rot underground. Becca began loading her firewood, 3 cords of oak and hickory she'd cut and split during summer, properly seasoned from months of sun exposure. Would lift roof section using lever, Stack wood carefully on elevated platform, replace roof. The wood descended into underground chamber where conventional wisdom said it would rot. Through September and October, as autumn rains fell, the underground shed's drainage system demonstrated its capability. Heavy rains would saturate surface soil, but water approaching pit would hit perimeter gravel trenches, flow through stones, drain away without entering chamber. The slight rise location meant natural surface drainage flowed away from pit rather than toward it. The interior remained dry. She'd check weekly by lifting roof section and examining wood. Found platform consistently dry, no standing water, no dampness on firewood surfaces. The gravel drainage was working as designed. The proof came during sustained November rain. 5 days of heavy precipitation, totaling 8 inches that saturated Iowa soil, turned fields into mud, overflowed drainage ditches, and ruined surface-stored firewood throughout Cedar Rapids area, while underground pit remained dry through superior engineering. The rain started November 7th at dawn with steady downpour that continued without meaningful break for 120 hours. First day dropped 2 inches, creating surface puddles. Second day added another 2 inches, saturating topsoil. Third day brought 1.5 inches, penetrating deeper into clay layers. Fourth day added 1 inch, flooding low areas. Fifth day delivered final 1.5 inches before finally stopping November 12th at dawn. Total 8 inches over 5 days was approximately twice normal November precipitation. The sustained nature, continuous rain rather than scattered storms, prevented any drying between events. Everything stayed wet continuously for 5 days, overwhelming drainage systems designed for moderate rainfall. Harold Jennings's conventional above-ground firewood storage faced the deluge from exposed position. His stack was built on raised platform 3 feet above ground, using thick timber posts and crossbeams, proper construction that cost $20 in materials and labor. Platform prevented ground contact, as recommended by all storage wisdom. The firewood was stacked carefully in crisscross pattern, allowing air circulation between layers, covered with heavy canvas tarp secured with ropes and weights. The arrangement represented best practices for surface storage, elevation, circulation, weather protection. Day 1. November 7th, the rain began testing the system. Light, steady rain hitting tarp, running off edges, creating puddles around platform base. The wood stayed mostly dry, though humidity increased. By evening first day, the tarp was sagging slightly under accumulated water weight. Day 2, rain continued and problems emerged. Wind gusts caused tarp edges to flap, creating gaps where rain could penetrate. Water accumulating on tarp surface found seams and tiers, beginning to drip through onto firewood. The stack's crisscross pattern that provided circulation also provided pathways for rain penetration. Jennings went out in rain afternoon, day 2, to adjust tarp, tighten ropes, redirect water. But fixing one problem created another. Pulling tarp tight on one side created slack on opposite side. The continuous rain gave him no dry period to properly resecure the covering. Day 3, the stack was clearly wet. Bottom layers showed moisture from splash-up as rain hit puddles around platform base. Top layers showed dampness from tarp leakage. Middle layers developed condensation from humidity trapped in crisscross gaps. The firewood was absorbing water faster than circulation could remove it. By day 4, Jennings was deeply concerned about fuel supply. Split sample piece to check interior moisture, found outer 2 inches were 25% moisture content, interior still around 15%. The dampness was progressing inward from prolonged exposure. Day 5, he gave up trying to protect the stack and focused on retrieving usable wood before it became completely saturated. Pulled tarp aside, grabbed pieces from center of stack where interior position provided some protection, stacked them under cabin porch overhang, hoping they'd dry before being needed. Francis Coleman's covered shed storage fared slightly better, but still suffered significant moisture intrusion. His firewood shed had proper roof and 3 walls, but open front for air circulation as conventional wisdom recommended. The roof kept direct rain off wood. Walls blocked wind-driven rain from sides and back, but 8 inches of rain over 5 days created challenges the shed couldn't handle. Heavy rain created spray when hitting ground near open front. Wind drove rain horizontally into open entrance, despite roof overhang. Humidity inside shed reached near 100% with no ventilation to remove it. By November 12th, Coleman's firewood was at 20% moisture, not completely saturated, but significantly damper than efficient burning required. Would need extra wood to achieve same heating, would generate more creosote in chimney, would produce excessive smoke. Both households faced winter-burning damp wood that would waste fuel and create heating inefficiency. The surface storage everyone considered proper had failed under sustained rain that exceeded design capacity. Meanwhile, Becca's underground pit shed experienced the same 5-day deluge from completely different perspective. Heavy rain fell on timber roof, ran off shake covering, dripped onto saturated ground around pit edges. Surface soil became completely waterlogged, puddles forming, grass submerged, mud everywhere. But the engineering prevented underground moisture intrusion. Water seeping into saturated soil would normally flow toward any underground void following gravity. The pit represented 6-foot-deep void that should have accumulated water like swimming pool. The perimeter drainage trenches intercepted approaching groundwater first. Gravel-filled trenches 20 feet long, extending from each side of pit, created high permeability pathway. Water seeping through saturated clay toward pit would hit gravel layer first. Enter stones where flow was faster than through clay. Follow slight grade away from pit, draining into lower ground beyond. The drainage trenches were actively working. Becca could see water seeping from trench outlets 20 feet from pit, creating small streams carrying intercepted groundwater away before it reached storage chamber. Water that somehow bypassed perimeter trenches and entered pit area from top would drop through surface soil layer but encounter 2-foot gravel layer at pit bottom. Would flow horizontally through gravel much faster than could accumulate vertically, draining toward perimeter trenches and exiting. The elevated pole platform kept firewood separated from gravel layer. Even if water somehow pooled on gravel, which it didn't, the wood remained 2 feet above in dry airspace. After rain stopped November 12th, Becca lifted removable timber roof section using lever system. Looked into pit at firewood stack resting on pole platform. Climbed down ladder to examine closely. Found wood completely dry, no surface moisture, no dampness when handled, crisp, clean sound when pieces struck together. Split one piece to check interior versus exterior moisture. Found uniform 15% throughout, identical to when stored in September. No moisture gradient, no weather effects. Perfect preservation maintained through 8 inches of sustained rain that ruined surface storage throughout area. Harold Jennings visited November 15th to check on widow he expected to find with rotted firewood supply destroyed by underground storage experiment. He'd spent the previous week burning damp wood from his own failed surface storage, watching it sizzle and steam, generating half the heat it should while consuming extra fuel. Arrived at Becca's farm mid-morning, noticed immediately that she had timber frame positioned over what appeared to be rectangular pit. Walked closer, saw the removable roof sections, the 6-inch ventilation gaps, the engineering that contradicted simple burial. Found Becca using lever system to lift one roof section, exposing the pit interior below. She was selecting firewood from underground chamber, pulling dry split oak pieces up using rope and bucket system. The wood made unmistakable, crisp, clean sound when pieces struck together, the sharp percussion of properly seasoned wood at 15% moisture. Jennings examined piece she'd just retrieved. Surface was dry, no dampness when rubbed with hand, no visual moisture. Knocked 2 pieces together. heard sharp crack rather than dull thud that damp wood produces. Split small piece using hatchet she provided, found interior identical to exterior, uniform dryness throughout with no moisture gradient. "Your underground wood is completely dry," Jennings said, struggling to reconcile observation with predictions he'd made. "5 days of sustained rain just saturated my covered stack positioned above ground on proper platform. Your buried wood stayed dry. The underground storage I warned would create rot and dampness is actually superior to surface methods." Becker invited Jennings to examine the complete drainage system so he could understand the engineering rather than just observing the result. They walked around pit perimeter together while she explained each element, showed him gravel-filled drainage trenches extending 20 feet in all directions from pit edges, explained how approaching groundwater would hit high permeability gravel layer, flow through stones faster than through clay, follow slight grade away from pit draining into lower ground beyond chamber. They walked to trench outlets 20 feet from pit, where water was still seeping out. Visual proof the drainage system was actively intercepting groundwater and channeling it away before it could reach storage chamber. Returned to pit edge, lifted roof section fully, invited Jennings to climb down ladder into chamber to examine from inside. He descended carefully, stood on gravel layer beneath elevated pole platform, looked up at neatly stacked firewood above him, examined the gravel beneath his feet, found it dry despite surface soil being saturated, reached down, grabbed handful of stones, squeezed. No water dripped out despite 8 inches of rain having fallen. The drainage was working so efficiently that water flowed through horizontally without accumulating vertically. Looked up at elevated platform, 60 poles laid parallel with 2-inch gaps creating surface for firewood storage. The poles kept wood separated from gravel layer by approximately 2 feet of airspace. Even if water somehow pooled on gravel, the wood would remain dry in elevated position. Examined the firewood stacking from below, saw how air could circulate through gaps between pieces, how ventilation openings at roof edges created continuous airflow pathway. The system wasn't sealed vault, but engineered chamber with active drainage and ventilation. "Your design is sophisticated engineering, not simple burial," Jennings said, understanding replacing assumptions. "The location on rise prevents surface water accumulation. The perimeter trenches intercept groundwater before it reaches pit. The bottom gravel provides rapid horizontal drainage. The elevated platform separates wood from any residual moisture. The ventilation prevents humidity buildup. Every element works together, creating dry storage superior to surface methods." By spring 1871, 12 households in Cedar Rapids area had built underground pit firewood sheds using Becker's drainage principles. Not all went 6 feet deep. Some built 4-foot pits as compromise. But all used gravel drainage, elevated platforms, ventilation gaps, creating dry, protected storage. Becker became respected consultant, helped neighbors select locations with good drainage, advised on gravel layer thickness and perimeter trench design, calculated ventilation requirements, was paid in labor barter, sometimes food, occasionally cash. The income supported her comfortably. She lived on the farm for 34 years, from 1866 when she married Samuel to 1900 when she sold and moved to Cedar Rapids town. The underground shed remained functional throughout, the drainage system keeping firewood dry every winter. Becker lived until 1936, dying at age 92. Her obituary mentioned her widowhood and farming, but focused primarily on the underground firewood shed. The storage that proved dry wasn't about being above ground, but having proper drainage. Modern analysis of similar underground storage confirmed the principles. Surface storage, experiencing moisture from precipitation, ground contact, and condensation. Underground storage with engineered drainage, experiencing none of these. representing superior preservation through isolation and engineering. The story is about a widow who understood that underground didn't mean damp if you prevented water accumulation, who recognized that fighting weather exposure above ground was harder than eliminating exposure below ground with proper drainage, who proved that the driest firewood isn't the most exposed, it's the most protected with best drainage, because sometimes the best storage is hiding from weather rather than fighting it. The buried firewood everyone called foolish stayed drier than surface wood everyone called proper. And digging pit alone wasn't madness. It was engineering that made winter survival manageable.